Subscribe to our YouTube channel and press the bell icon to get the latest updates.
I'm with Dr. C Raja Mohan, one of India's best-known strategic thinkers, director at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. Right now in Singapore, in a former life, in a former reincarnation, shall I say, Dr. Raja Mohan was actually a journalist with The Hindu in the United States in the early 90s, so he knows the US very well. Also has kept in very, very close touch with the India-US relationship. And of course, we are here talking about the American presidential poll. Dr. Raja Mohan, welcome to The Print.
Thank you, Jyoti. Thank you for having me.
Well, the big question, of course, is that it's been 2 days, well, at least India time, it's been 2 days since the US started voting for a new president, and 36 hours or 48 hours later, the results are still not in, which is sort of really surprising for us in India because we use EVMs, and in the US they still use postal ballots. But just some quick leads that two big networks have put out. Associated Press, which is a big news agency, says that Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee, has got 264 electoral votes, and they're giving Donald Trump, the sitting president, 214 votes, electoral votes, while CNN reports 253 electoral votes for Joe Biden and 213 electoral votes for Donald Trump. And of course, the magic figure being 270 electoral votes. So your first thoughts and first comments.
Look, I think Joe Biden is kind of closing in many of the states where Trump seemed to have lead initially. Now, as the mail-in ballots are being counted, I think Biden is making up, and he just needs about 6 votes. So I think it's only a question of time now. So I think it is already tilted in his favor. My sense is, while the counting might take time, it is going to be, I think, Joe Biden claiming victory. Now, whether Trump will concede defeat and whether this goes to the courts. So I think we're already beginning to see lawsuits, a whole range of legal questions being raised. So I think as far as the numbers are concerned, it's quite clear now the way the thing is going, Biden will be in a very good position.
Right.
But Trump is raising legal questions on procedure, on the format, on the way this whole process has been done. So he's going to he's already raised those questions, and how that plays out is what we're going to say. You're complaining about 2 days. This could go well till December 14th, when actually there is a deadline where the Electoral College has to meet and come up with a decision. So the courts, my sense is, if there is enough meat in the case that Trump is putting forward, the courts will be engaged. So you might have to even wait till December 14th to have a final verdict of the Electoral College.
Well, we really don't want to wait till December. I mean, whether the Americans certainly don't want to wait, and neither does the rest of the world. And this interview is being broadcast around noon, around 12 noon on the 5th of November here from Delhi. You're in Singapore, of course, Dr. Raja Mohan. But the big question is that how is the world looking at America? I mean, in the Indian newspapers, we are still, hedging our bets, not saying one way or the other whether it's going to be Biden or Trump. But in parts of the world, China, for example, some of the big networks have also not been openly critical, but somewhat so.
No, I think the narrative has shifted in favor of Biden. So I think the rest of the world has no choice but to make adjustments to what happens in Washington now. The process is taking long, so we don't have a choice. Those of us who are outside, you would have liked some preference, but the fact is now...
What would you have liked?
Sorry?
What would you have liked?
No, it's really, that's what, we don't... I think one of the problems with the American election is everybody thinks they have a vote in the election. We don't have a vote in the election. So the kind of the spectacle, the idea of a game show, ball-by-ball commentary that goes on for almost 2 years, gives a sense we all have a say in the outcome. We don't have a say. We have no choice, whether it's Trump or Biden. to deal with the outcome in the US election. So our focus should be on analyze about this election. So what are the forces that brought it to this stage? And what does it mean for different countries? So if the mood is changing against immigration in the US, then it has an outcome. So it doesn't matter for us whether it's Biden or Trump. So I think if you look at the key issues and the structure of power, like anybody looking at India would say, look, where is the power shifted to? Is there a bunch of new guys trying to run the country? So I think we like to focus on those issues rather than what we liked is really relevant to what is happening.
But tell me, Dr. Raja Mohan, we talk about the key issues. Now, one of the biggest issues over the last several months has been the pandemic, the coronavirus pandemic. And we've seen how Donald Trump has handled that. He's refused to wear a mask publicly. Privately, of course, he's been, according to some reports, he's been quite worried. But his administration has pushed several vaccine candidates. But despite the coronavirus, he's losing. What do you make of that? Or, seems to be losing.
No, I think what is interesting is that despite nearly 200,000 people being dead because with the coronavirus, the Trump is still standing.
Yeah.
So I think that is far more interesting.
So what does that mean?
No, that's what, I think the idea that, look, the whole Biden campaign was, look, this guy mismanaged it. He's responsible for so many deaths and he should be thrown out of office. That was their main plank.
Yeah.
Now here, he's got 5 million more votes in the popular vote. He's losing it in those key states with very, very narrow margins, probably in 10,000 here, 10,000 there. So the fact is, he stood there. And I think his argument today, you're beginning to see in many other countries, the opposition to lockdowns. It's not that whether he's wearing a mask or not, because the economic consequences, like in India, we talk about Jan and Jahan. that there is life and livelihood was an issue that people are saying, look, how long are you going to lock it down? Now, so I think that, I think that has come out irrelevant to the outcome. The fact is, his arguments that, look, it is all because of China. We can't shut it down. In fact, the way it has been framed in the US is liberty versus lockout. So I think that argument had takers, and I think we have to note that. So what is interesting is, to continue with this, look, for 4 years, the entire American establishment first called him a Soviet agent, they tried a Russian agent, they tried to, they impeached him in the House, but they could not get it through the Senate. The whole media has demonized him. The big tech companies, Facebook and Twitter, were censoring him. Yet he's got 68 million votes. So I think what we're looking at is a deep polarization in the US politics. And Trump has got 48% of the vote. Now, how does that play out? But of course, in the near term, the winners will...
Yeah, I just want to ask you a little bit more, if you can delve into this a bit more. This polarization that you talk about in America, the fact that Trump is still standing. So it's just not the liberty versus lockdown argument, isn't it? There must be more.
No, I think he's mobilized people, and I think on a range of issues. In the North, for example, in the Midwestern states where he's losing, the opposition to free trade, that has had some resonance in a large section of the working class, which has voted for him. He's also tried to mobilize the minority votes, for example, blacks. It was taken for granted that the blacks will always vote Democratic Party. Now the numbers are still coming in, but according to some at least, almost 30% of the black men have voted for Trump. So when Trump raises the question of immigration, okay, Indians might not like it, but the fact is, migration suppresses wages, and that affects whites, blacks, Latinos, and even the Latinos who came in, they don't want illegal immigration to take place. So I think he's raised issues on trade, on immigration, on the relationship with China. Those will endure, and I think he has got support, but he's lost the war. So what happens when the Democrats take over? I think they will start running it. The question is, can they simply ignore Trump and Trump era? Or do they have to try and create some compromises? That I think is going to be fascinating because the Democrats themselves are deeply divided, and how this plays out. So the story I think has begun, and a second story just begins.
Yeah. So on the immigration issues, I mean, this also reminds us of the immigration issues that are, or the controversies in India, in our country, where we have, the Citizenship Amendment Act, that has been, that came into being in 2014. Of course, the act came in later, but immigration from other South Asian countries. But in America, would you say that the Biden administration would then build upon what Mr. Trump has done?
Look, I think there is India, every Indian engineer thinks he has a right to work in the United States. Because the world has been good to India, in a sense, for 50 years. When America threw open its borders. And then the English-speaking Western world, that is Australia, New Zealand, Canada, Britain, had opened doors. But today, I think there is a backlash against too much of immigration. And that's a political issue. In the US, where too many outsiders, what do they do to communities? What do they do to jobs and wages, for example? So I think those issues do exist. Now, because of the US economy was growing very well, that they could absorb a lot of the costs. But today, there is a backlash. And I think Biden has promised Indians, look, no change. But I think that there's a lot of liberal opposition to immigration, a free kind of immigration. If you remember, New York Times, 4 or 5 years ago, was running this big campaign against Indian tech companies, saying how Indian tech companies have gamed the H-1B visas. It's really body shopping that is going on. So I think there will be some adjustments because president does not decide the immigration policies. The companies decide. But then I think the tussle will begin on immigration, what terms of immigration. I think that issue, Trump raised it, and I think it'll endure.
So a Biden administration will keep up with the Trump argument here. When you say endure, what does that mean?
No, it's not just administration. Look, Democrats are saying, look, immigration is good. We are a country of immigrants, so we should just keep the doors open. All refugees should be able to come. Once you go in, you can bring in your father, your mother, your cousin, a nephew. Now, there is the counter argument that it has to be merit-based immigration. It must be skill-based immigration. That argument has not been settled. Now, how that plays out in the coming days.
How do you think it will affect India?
Look, I think India must be prepared for constraints on migration of the kind that we've enjoyed in the last 50 years. The good thing going for India is that even when migration is controlled, there is a likelihood that it will be skill-based, merit-based immigration, rather than immigration based on family reunions. That I think will continue to work for India because much of the Indian middle-class migration is skill-based. So that, I think the shortage of skilled personnel in the US will continue to demand imports. But the conditions, look, at what point? Is it $5,000 per month or it should be $6,000 per month? Some of those negotiations will take place. But it is the Congress that passes the law. So it is not Trump or Biden. It will be the political support for immigration.
So, the Congresswoman of Indian origin, Pramila Jayapal, has also won her election. And if you remember, a year or so ago, when the External Affairs Minister, Mr. Jaishankar, was in the US, he cancelled a meeting because she had been openly critical on Kashmir, and she was going to be in that meeting. Do you think that the Biden lot will be far more critical on human rights sort of values in India, whether it's Kashmir, the Northeast, or other, even in terms of the Muslim minorities?
Look, I think the two things here. Look, I mean, the Congress, irrespective of who the president is, there are 435 members of House of Representatives and other 100 members of the Senate. So everyone has the freedom to express opinion. So it is not that they decide what goes on in other countries. So they can raise objections, they can pass when they have strength, they can move bills. But I think one Pramila Jayapal, even under a Biden administration, is not going to change things. But the fact is, what you're right in saying, Democrats generally tend to raise more values-related questions, but they're also pragmatic at the end of the day. They're not, just waving a human rights flag everywhere, because after all, they'll find a common ground on the interest. For example, if Americans were merely chasing human rights, they should have snapped ties with a lot of countries long back. Our own experiences, they had no problem dealing with China or Pakistan. Both have different sets of issues. So I don't think we should take it too literally there will be pressures, but there will also be counter pressures in terms of Americans are pragmatic people. They balance interests and the values argument. And I think that continues. How that plays out depends on how well we do it. Second, I think, look, after what's happening in front of us in the elections, look, I think the American credibility in telling other people how to run their societies has never been too credible. And I think my sense is hopefully the Americans will focus more on getting their own house in order and lead by example, because people are going to turn around. The Chinese are already turning around saying, look, you can't even run an election.
That's right.
And you're telling me how to run my people. Now, I'm not justifying the Chinese, I'm not justifying the Saudi, anybody else. But I think the American priority, hopefully, is about fixing their own house rather than speaking on every single issue in every corner of the world. Of course, they can speak. Nobody can stop them from speaking.
In fact, you're right on China, because Global Times, an agency, the news agency that we follow closely, says deep-seated divisions in US contradict democratic values. So I think they're already talking in this vein. But tell us a little bit about China. Trump was openly very, very critical on China. In fact, just a week before, Trump's key advisors were in India, Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and the Defense Secretary. Now, do you think that this will be diluted in a Biden administration, whether the China focus is going to be diluted?
Look, I think, on human rights issues, what matters is really power. You have the power to hurt someone, you can do things. But if you're, for example, we've seen it in the past, you impose sanctions on Burma because Burma was a weak country. But China, where you have business, you do business with the Chinese. Now, what we've seen happen in the last 2 years is the China argument on the security front, on the human rights front, on the economic front. They've all come together today saying there is a challenge to China a challenge to the US from China on multiple fronts. Now, whether Biden will continue this or not, I would say let's look at it in three different ways. One is the security establishment, which I think has moved significantly. Both the FBI, the CIA, the defense,
they significantly in
the direction of the need to confront China.
Okay.
Second, even the Democratic Congress in the last 6 months has become far more critical of China on human rights. In fact, they blame Trump for not being strong enough on human rights, whether it's Tibet, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, Taiwan. So there is actually, within the Democratic Party, a stronger criticism of China. Where the game is loaded, a little more complicated, is on the economic front, where the business interests of the US, of the big tech, of the Wall Street, and of a whole lot of people in Washington, they see we should not disrupt the existing thing. While the logic of dealing with the trade unions, the logic of dealing with employment, the logic of America's economic future demands some contestation. So I think Biden will be pulled in different directions. But I think my sense is he's been around for 47 years. And I think he will try to balance these multiple elements. But I think on a security issue, certainly, I don't see a rollback. But on the economic thing, there will be a contestation. And my sense is Trump, in a way, has given a lot of leverage for Biden, having imposed all the tariffs, sanctions. So Biden can use that to bargain with the Chinese. But I think Chinese too have become stronger. They're not just merely going to cede to the American demands. Mm-hmm. So the structural contestation between them, I don't see it disappearing anytime soon.
So, the Chinese are sitting on Indian territory in Ladakh, Dr. Raja Mohan. The Trump administration was very, very critical, especially of that. Do you think that will continue?
Look, I think, India is not asking the Americans to send their troops. So Americans lose nothing by supporting India. So I think I don't see why Biden would simply give that up. So I think they're quite happy to do more business with India on the security side.
But that would mean a greater confrontation with China if you're going to take names.
No, it's not the India. See, look, India was not the central point of confrontation between US and China.
What was?
There is Hong Kong, there is Taiwan, there is a whole lot of issues in South China Sea. So India is really marginal to those considerations.
Marginal to Trump?
Marginal to both. Look, if you see a hierarchy of threats from China to the United States, the India-China border war comes well below I mean, it is not the number one issue for the Americans. American troops are sitting in Japan. American troops are sitting in, South Korea, whether the Americans fear that the Chinese are going to push them out. Those are the big issues. So we are there. It is useful for the Americans to support us. It's useful for us to take their support to the extent what we get. But I think beyond that, I don't see this being the main issue between the Americans and the Chinese.
What do you think will be the main issue?
I said, look, South China Sea, the question of, Taiwan, how China is going to deal with Taiwan, the question of how China is going to deal with ASEAN and the neighbors, what should be the security structures in Asia. So those are the primary issues. So India is really secondary to those.
So if India is secondary, which means that the aggression in Ladakh is secondary to the US, which it must be because, that's not their primary concern. And so you would say then that talk is cheap, that whether it was the Trump guys who were saying that they support India and its confrontation with the Chinese, or whether...
But what else are you looking for, Jyoti? You're not asking the Americans to send their troops.
No, but you're looking for exchange of information, perhaps.
Yes, why would the Biden want to stop it?
Okay.
So it's not that he's sending... So the big stuff is on the East.
Yeah.
Now, in this, there is a consensus in Washington that, look, helping India is in their interest. So they'll do it. But this is not the one on which US and China are going to go to war.
Right.
They have bigger fish to fry. At this point, Americans will keep their options open. And I think they have every interest in Biden people have to continue to support India. And they will also need India on a range of other issues because there will be rearrangement of the global trading system. Biden people are talking about a democracy summit. They want to bring the democracies together. Biden has talked about all the democracies must be together to deal with the China challenge. So I think India has a huge number of options. So it's not as if, some more change in Washington, we're going to be marginal to Washington.
But I'm also saying that, it seemed here in Delhi that the Modi government was putting a lot of its eggs into the US basket, maybe not all of them, but a significant number of them. Now, would a Biden administration mean that you have to also reorient your own foreign policy a little bit?
Look, I think, Jyoti, I've covered the India-US relationship since the mid-90s. So it's not as if Modi has put everything today. I mean, I think it has been a growing relationship. Our trade has grown. The US has helped us get out of the nuclear isolation. They become more neutral in India-Pakistan conflicts. And this has happened across the board between Clinton, Bush, Obama, and Trump. So I don't see, that Modi made some mistake by putting more clout. I mean, and that Biden is not complaining about it. It's only Indian political argument with each other. And Americans are not going to complain. They will need Indian support because India is one of the large economies of the world. It's got a voice. So
what are the Indians complaining about?
Oh, sorry, it's Indian internal argument. It has nothing to do with the US. The opposition and the government argue with each other. Oh, you screwed up the US. Oh, you put too much on Trump. That is really our politics within. It has nothing to do with the rest of the world, how they deal with us.
Mm-hmm. But that's a good argument, isn't it? Because as the foreign policy establishment is reorienting itself, which is a good thing. I mean, the Cold War ended, quite a few years ago. But there is a domestic argument about what India should do in its foreign policy.
That is domestic politics, Jyoti. That is not a merit. That people argue. The government does, so must be something wrong. That is the job of the opposition.
Right.
But is anybody complaining in Washington? Has anybody from the Biden people said, look, oh, you supported Trump, therefore I'm going to cancel you out? Nobody's saying that. Biden reached out to the Indian voters and said, look, please vote for me. I'll get to the H-1B visas back. We want to work together with India. That's what they're saying at this point. So we sometimes translate our internal arguments. We transpose them to how other people might look at us. So, but democracies, we keep fighting with each other all the time, but that has nothing to do with how the US is going to deal with us.
So Dr. Raja Mohan, explain to me, these defense pacts that have been signed between India and the US over the last 4 years of Trump and, of course, Prime Minister Modi. The last one just a week or so ago, the BECA, right? The Basic Exchange Cooperation Agreement. Now, does this mean that the Biden guys can overturn it, or will this remain?
Look, in fact, the Democrats were trying for it. If you remember, it was the Ash Carter, who was a defense secretary in the Obama administration. Before him, Bob Gates. Look, the ideas that India should sign these agreements has started in 2004 under Bush. Obama was very eager to take it forward. Obama was very eager to have a Quad. It was UPA government that was resisting those initiatives. And
Obama wanted a Quad and the UPA was
resisting. Of course, yeah. So it was reluctance in Delhi that stopped those. India took 15 years to negotiate the LEMOA with the Americans. And then within 1 year, then you sign with the French, you're signing with the Japanese, Australians. So again, it had to do with our domestic politics. It had nothing to do with the merits, because after all, Obama, the Biden people are not going to complain, oh, why did you sign that with them? They say, okay, what do we do next? You come here, what do we do next?
That's interesting. You're saying that the Barack Obama also wanted a much deeper defense relationship with India, but it was Prime Minister Manmohan Singh's government that basically pulled back.
Because in the first term, it was a problem with the left, which they opposed the nuclear deal, they opposed the defense cooperation agreement. In the second term, the Congress leadership itself seemed hesitant to go forward with the Americans, which is what changed. And once we had a strong government under the Modi government, they changed the positions, and here we are.
Would you say then that just like Barack Obama, who wanted a deeper defense relationship, and that was continued by Trump, would you say that the same thing has happened in Delhi?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you see a net trajectory from 2000, we moved along, but on the defense issue, where the UPA was far more reserved in terms of expanding defense cooperation. And that's a whole story. We can talk about it sometime. It was, after all, Manmohan Singh who signed the nuclear deal. It was Pranab Mukherjee who signed the defense deal with the Americans. But they found resistance within their own party, and also from the CPM in the first term. But in the second term, the Congress leadership said, look, no, let's not go too close to the Americans. Let's go back to non-alignment 2.0. So we held ourselves back. But I think once Modi came, they said, look, we're not holding ourselves back. We want to build what we can with the Americans.
So is it a zero-sum game, Dr. Raja Mohan? If you have better ties with the US, does this mean that you forget old ties with Russia? After all, 60 or 65 or 70% of your defense hardware, you're still dependent on the Russians for it.
But where did Rajnath Singh go when the crisis began? He didn't go to Washington. He went to Moscow. So who's talking about abandoning?
Because of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization meeting that was taken place. And the Chinese were sitting on your territory in Ladakh.
Exactly. That is an excuse. No, the problem is whether SCO or not. If we turn to the Russians for sustaining your supplies during a military conflict with China. And Russians are quite happy with it. They're doing it. So nobody's saying abandon the Russia relationship because you have to be nice to the Americans.
Not abandon, but diminish or dilute.
No. Look, the defense relationship has not stopped. The S-400 deal is going on. So it's again, you see, it's a political argument. Look, because you're going to the Americans, you're abandoning the Russians. I mean, Russians are saying, look, they're not abandoning us. We're not abandoning them. Just as we manage the complexity of the US-Russia relationship, the Russians will also manage the complexity of the India-China relationship. They're friends to both. We're not telling them don't be friends with China.
So explain that to me, the complexity of the Russia-China relationship and how that impacts on us. And the reason I'm asking this is if India is dependent on Russia for its defense hardware, or a significant amount, and the Russians are selling hardware to the Chinese. So how does this triangle work? That's
the real world, Jyoti. I mean, you can't tell your neighbors they only deal with me and nobody else. So you, within the constraints of what we have, whether it's Americans, Russians, Chinese, you decide, okay, this is the room here. How do I manage the difficulties that have, as in life, so in international relations? So I think under a Biden administration, which is likely to take charge, there will be room, there will be some arguments. It's not as if some Biden people are more anti-Russia than Trump is. So they might raise questions on sanctions on CATSA. We have to deal with it. So India is not going to fold up just because a bunch of guys in Biden administration don't like Russia. We said, okay, let's talk. We have a problem here. How do you limit that problem? That doesn't mean you stop the rest of the relationship.
So do you think a US-Russia relationship will become worse than it already is under Trump? I mean, it's been pretty bad under Trump.
Yeah, I mean, I think because the Biden people, the Democrats, have built up this Russia intervention, Russia threat argument. Whether they'll keep it or not, that's what Delhi would watch. Whether what they've said so far is pretty bad about Russia.
Right.
But they're also talking about arms control. They want to go back to the Russians on arms control. They want to be with the Russians on Iran deal. So we'll see. I mean, Delhi will see how this plays out, because everything is not predetermined in that sense.
So last couple of questions, Dr. Raja Mohan. The Americans have just opened an embassy in the Maldives. Now, that's been quite interesting, because for the longest time it was India that was the primary relationship, even for somebody like the US. Now, does this mean that this diminishes India's role, or does the South Asian space, is the US going to be much more interested in expanding its ties with South Asia? Just like China has.
Exactly. So I think there was a time when India said, look, no other power should come to your neighborhood. That's been the story since independence. And we remember 87, there was a big hullabaloo in Delhi about America setting up a Voice of America station in Sri Lanka, big objections by India. Look, I think it's a very different world we are in. So right now, if you see the Yamin government, that's one before this, was close to doing things with China, which India did not like. So, and now Delhi is saying, look, we deal with them in a different basis now. And having the Americans there is also going to be part of life. So we deal with it. So what is your principal threat? Are the Americans going to undermine your security in South Asia? Or is it Chinese who are trying to undermine your security in South Asia? No, you tell me. I mean, if you answer that question.
I'm the one asking the question.
I'll tell you, on Kashmir, there was a time when the Americans opposed you on Kashmir, but today they're the ones who are helping you block it in the United Nations. On the nuclear issue, there was a time Americans were imposing sanctions on you. Today it is China that is blocking you in the nuclear supplies group. There was a time when you could tell the Americans, look, leave this place to me. But today you feel the Chinese threat is a bigger threat, whether it's in Ladakh, whether it's Indian Ocean. So India is prepared to work with the US today because there's a less of a threat. And if I were a Chinese scholar, I would say, you challenge is near, the next door neighbor is your problem. Therefore, you balance it by coordinating with the distant power. So US as a distant power that has no territorial dispute with you will always be far more used to you than a China that claims your territory, wants to expand its influence in South Asia at your expense. So I think it is a straightforward, but it's only in India. We made it such a complicated argument. Somehow, even if China is slitting your throat, we should not talk to the Americans.
But Chinese scholars are already saying that India is the B team of the Americans. So should we be offended by that?
Look, it's very easy to get offended. Where were the Chinese? Why weren't they with the Americans against the Russians? We're talking about not too long ago, 70s, 60s, 80s. Mm-hmm. So when they do things with the Americans, that is great. That's about producing balance in Asia. When anybody else does it, oh my God, you're sold out. Look, this is the kind of nonsense that the Chinese can say, but that's in their interest to say. When they go, see, like when I do it, it's wonderful, but if you do it, it is a mistake.
Why is it in their interest to say that?
Sorry, that's all because they don't want the Americans around. So they tell this ASEAN, don't bring the Americans, I'll deal with you, but I'm telling you, whole of South China Sea is mine. They're telling you, settle it with me, let's go back to the original claims, and you learn to be subaltern to the Chinese. I mean, if that is okay with you, then it's fine. It's not okay with India. That's where we are.
So it's certainly not okay with India, but this thing about, accusing the Indians of being...
Look, I mean, why are you... No, look.
No, I'm just saying, are they deliberately trying to be offensive?
Of course, what is the propaganda department for?
Okay.
Look, that's what they're supposed to do, right? I mean, they're paid to do that. So we should... Look, it's your interest. You define your interest. Where is your security challenge? Who are your partners? Who can help you? Who is harming you? That should be the first question. Not saying, how far are you from the Americans today? I mean, that is really secondary question.
So that's the last question, Dr. Raja Mohan. Who is helping India and who is harming it?
I told you on Kashmir. It is the Western countries, US, France, that are helping you. Hmm. China is not. China is the source of the problem. So where is the confusion here? I mean, that, as I said, look, Deng Xiaoping said, look, let's align with the distant power Americans against the near power Russia, which was a threat. So we're just following their footsteps. They should be pleased that India is learning tricks from the Chinese.
Thank you so much for your time, Dr. Raja Mohan. Always a pleasure to talk to you, to interview you. It's a lesson in diplomacy. And we will call upon you, of course, as the election unfolds, and we will know who the next president of the US is. Until then, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Thank you, Jyoti.